I don't know, but
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
hello, everybody. Shall we get started? Fantastic. Feels a little weird hearing my voice echo back and forth, but hopefully we can get through it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Uh, we are excited to do a panel on liability in AI. For the next sort of 45 minutes or so, we'll spend the first 30 minutes having a discussion between ourselves. We have a panel of fantastic guests that I'd be happy to moderate. And then I'd love for you guys to have questions that you can bring forth as well, that we'll try and squeeze in a Q&A for about 10 minutes towards the end. Um, for for the purposes of this, I think we're going to define liability a little bit more broadly rather than just specifically focus on the legal side of it. Part of it is because we don't know exactly how it is defined yet, which we'll try and make a valiant effort to do over the next 30 minutes or so. Surely, such a large topic doesn't need more than 30 minutes to nail down, so I think it'll be fun. But let me start with a quick round of introductions, and then we'll go into a couple of questions and kick the discussion off, if you're good with that. My name is Rohit. I'll be your moderator this morning. I am the Chief Product Officer for an AI platform company, which I guess doesn't surprise many of you here. I've been in the space for a very long time. I started training models when I was in college, spent several years on the business side, both investing as well as advising companies, and now back to building companies. So this is a topic that is extremely dear to my heart. Why don't we just kick it off and introduce ourselves so that you know who's going to be speaking to you this morning. Adil?
So, thank you, Rohit.
Yeah.
So, I'm Adil. Assalamu alaikum. I'm CEO of VResolve.io. We are an AI and embedded software development company. We basically, I represent the startup space in this panel with gentlemen being more experienced in corporate. We specialize where someone has an idea and they don't have the technical expertise or the resources to pull it off. So that's where I come in. And it is also backed by hardware. So if you want to run AI on the edge where you don't have access to the internet, this is one of the specialty that we offer. I have been in the space for about a decade, I guess. I pioneered the first automotive software development company of Pakistan back in 2018. We had the pleasure of working with Cadriad, Magna, Volkswagen. So it's an honor to be here and looking forward to have a very interactive session with you guys. Over to you.
Hey guys, my name's Andrew Jackson. I lead an Inception group out of G42, which is an Abu Dhabi-based company. We generally build models. So we build models in different areas, domain-specific models and language-specific models. So we build models in domains such as genomics. We're releasing a genomics model shortly. We're also doing, yesterday I was in Mumbai, we released a Hindi model. We're doing energy models. We're doing kind of investment models. So really focusing on those kind of key domains and those key interesting languages. We're also working in the agentic space and moving more and more from kind of a research group to a commercial group, which is an interesting journey as well. But we're also representing kind of responsible AI for G42 as a whole, which is G42 is a large, I guess, conglomerate of different companies all focused on AI, from data centers to infrastructure to I guess, space. Space 42 is one of the companies. M42 is our health company. Presight is kind of a more generalized government-facing company in the kind of analytics and big data domain. So we represent kind of AI across this entire group. So I come back from a kind of an academic background myself. I did a lot of time in academia, but then worked in kind of came out and applied that in companies such as Palantir that are in the region. So I've been in the region for 24 years now. So I've been here a long time, but happy to be here today.
Thank you. I'm Joe Malik. I'm the Vice President.
I think you're
We can't hear you.
audio.
Audio? Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Joe Malik. I'm the Vice President of Executive Programs at Gartner. Gartner is a world-leading research company in the technology field. We support clients across their initiatives in the technology space. And as you know, AI has been a top priority in the region and globally. And specifically, one of the key topics that we're seeing in AI is actually AI governance and ethics. And I'm glad to be part of this panel to discuss these key priorities.
Fantastic. I mean, we have quite an eclectic group, which is great because this is a large topic. Maybe let me start at the highest level. We talked a little bit about research and we talked a little bit about commercialization of various facets. So let's maybe try to start by defining AI. Obviously, it's a very vast topic. You talked about all different types of models that can be done, and there are all different sectors that it can be associated with. Do you guys want to give a quick brief of like some of the sectors and areas that you're working in or the types of AI models, and then we can dive into the details there? Do you want to start?
Sure. So how about we get some input from the audience, what they think about AI?
Feel free to shout.
Human likability.
Okay.
Right. So I'll build on that. So exactly. So this is what we see nowadays, that when we think about OpenAI or when we think about Meta, what they're trying to do, it looks like that they're building stuff to replace humans, but this is a more diverse field. So traditionally, AI is mathematics, basically, that deep down there. Once upon a time, we used to understand that mathematics, Bayesian learning. And then we started delving into this deep learning, where we stopped understanding what it's doing, but it does very elegantly and very beautifully, and we love it. And then with deep learning, we had what we call the peak of convolutional neural networks. So vision part of the problem was almost solved, right? And that was cool, but that wasn't impacting our daily lives. Then in 2022, the OpenAI happened, ChatGPT happened. That's where the LLMs became mainstream. So NLP has been there like for I think since 1987, when the recurrent neural networks were introduced. But we couldn't really harness them till 2022. And after 2022, I think this is the thing that is affecting us all.
Right.
AI became the mainstream thing, and I think what we will try to achieve here today is also to address some of these things, that it's not purely about replacing humans. It's about also equipping humans in general as well.
Andrew?
Well, I work generally in large language models.
Okay.
And the group I work within is in this. I guess we see AI as a very broad subject, but we're focused in these areas. Now, what we see is quite often people are abusing these models. Like most technologies, people come out with a new technology and they try and use it for everything, right? So for me, there's certain models that are already existing which are phenomenal to solve the problems that they solve. Computer vision on its own is great. The problem that we have at the moment with AI is it's all converging into these multimodal models. So I think this is kind of confusing or in some way kind of blurring the lines between the different AI disciplines. So I think this is kind of part of the confusion that we're seeing today about what is AI. It's kind of everything and it's nothing. Because everyone's claiming AI to some degree. Even if you're a kind of a data company, you're now all of a sudden an AI company. So it's a tricky one because data is part of the conversation, and I think AI is in some way is a prism through which data is reflected. So for me, it's all a bit congealed and it's a bit kind of stuck together. So trying to pull it all apart into a kind of a reasonable conversation is quite difficult. But I certainly appreciate that AI is one of these things that has become just more of a hype word now than a defined thing. So for me, I'm a large language model person, and that's what I do.
Understood.
Yeah, maybe for me, I'll take the business perspective of it.
Yep.
But what we're seeing in the market are, I would say, two overarching themes of AI use cases. One is everyday AI, which is where we see 80% of the initiatives globally happening. But we're also seeing a shift towards game-changing AI. Game-changing AI is still where we see 3 to 5% of the initiatives happening, and the rest is in the middle. But game-changing AI use cases is basically leveraging AI to disrupt an industry. What do I mean by that? Take education, for example. If you have a personalized teacher for a student with personalized coaches developed by AI, this is a game-changing. You're delivering education in a different manner through AI.
Right.
So what we're seeing is now more of a shift towards game-changing. However, productivity and everyday AI is still the most used initiatives. And if I wanted to take particularly a use case or a set of use cases, I would say productivity.
Right.
If I ask you what the most used AI in your fields, you would say AI is helping me in writing emails, AI is helping me in contextualizing certain research, or AI is helping me in summarizing and developing content. And this is where we see the majority of AI being used. But it's increasing. We see more application in customer experience. We see more application happening as well in driving innovation or across. So though the majority now is on everyday AI use cases, we are starting to see a trend moving more into game-changing AI, where AI will disrupt sectors and will disrupt business processes as well.
That was a really sort of interesting mix of perspectives there, because we talked a little bit about the various forms of AI that existed or has existed for a while, right? Like the models we trained 15, 20 years ago, the baby ones obviously can't do what ChatGPT can do or Claude can do or Google can do or whatever. At the same time, the big emergence here is from diffusion large language models, because they can do things that only humans used to be able to do in the past, and that's new. And that creates the opportunity to do entirely new businesses that you just couldn't have done before, education being an example of that. So sort of if you combine these three things, let's maybe split it into like, there's a set of historic models that, economic forecasting, Andrew, you kind of mentioned, that existed. We kind of know what to do with it. We understand the biases that can go into it because of the data, et cetera. And let's just put it in a box on the side for a second, and let's think about large language models or multimodal language models plus, say, CNN, self-driving, for example, something of that nature. These are the ones that are disrupting the industries that we see today. We have self-driving cars in a few places in the US. It's phenomenal. We have large language models that can teach us pretty much any topic you wanted to, with some caveats. Considering this from the job displacement perspective, maybe I'll start with you this time, Joe.
Yes.
Like, how do you see the landscape, the economic displacement landscape across different sectors?
Yeah, so perfect question. Definitely, like any revolution that happens either in the industry or technology, we expect that there will be a certain displacements of jobs.
Right.
We will see the rise of some new jobs that will happen because the jobs of the future are yet to be defined, and we'll see certain jobs moving away and maybe disappearing with time. So if I wanted to start more on the positive note, we will see AI generating significant amount of new opportunities. You might have started hearing about new job opportunities as a prompt engineer.
Right.
You see a lot of jobs happening on AI ethics, AI governance, AI specialist, but it also is going to other areas, such as neuroscience, where you need neuroscientists to help you develop these large models as well and put the human angle into it. What we see also for the new jobs is critical thinking, creativity, and emotional intelligence are the key traits that for the new jobs that will be maintained by humans. Now, looking at the other angle of things, which is the jobs that will be displaced, mainly routine job and knowledge worker jobs will change. One of our predictions is by 2030, we will see 100% increase in unionization of knowledge workers because of jobs that are being displaced by AI. Maybe I'll take just a small addition to say, and this is the role of entities and governments.
Right.
Entities and governments have started putting certain measures to mitigate these changes. The most important one would be upskilling and reskilling of the current workforce. The second one is to ensure that you have the right social network, social benefits to help those people who are displaced to move and to do new jobs easily in a safe manner.
That's really interesting. Let me just pick up on that and perhaps ask a question to you, Andrew, and to you, Adil. When you think about these displacements that are occurring, right, and might occur in the future, as folks who are developing some of these models, how much visibility do you have or can you have when you're developing them to how this will eventually end up playing in the economy?
I'll jump in on this because we're taking a very proactive role in this space. So we're trying to develop this large language model for Arabic, JACE, in UAE. And we realized very early on that there wasn't that much data available in Arabic, right? So we had to do a lot of actual kind of hands-on work to kind of gather this data. And then we realized at a certain point that we needed to do alignment for this model, and we needed to kind of bring a workforce together that spoke Arabic. So we tried to try and kill two birds with one stone because there's quite a lot of unemployment in UAE, surprisingly. especially in regions where people don't have access to industry. So we started bringing people in and training them how to do prompt engineering, to test our models, red team our models, but also to do data annotation, to improve our Arabic. Obviously, it's always strange for an Irish guy to speak about Arabic with an American name, but to be very confusing for this audience. But ultimately, we're taking a very proactive role to bring this new set of skills into our everyday work to generate these models. On one hand, it develops trust in the community because everybody understands how these things are made. It's no longer voodoo magic how these things are done. It upskills people to kind of take these models into the workforce, number two. And I think it also kind of gives people who didn't have an opportunity before to work remotely, especially like people who are ill, people who have dependents that they need to take care of. So it activates part of the workforce that was not previously activated. So we look at AI, and our whole mantra is AI for inclusion. So we're trying to be very inclusive about what we do. Our Arabic represents a large part of the world. We released a Hindi model yesterday as well, which represents another huge part of the world. And we're trying to kind of, in some way, focus on, there's obviously the megatrons of the US and China who are doing their big things. But, in this region, we want to shine a light on the kind of people who may be democratizing this kind of AI, right? To kind of bring it to everybody and making it inclusive. So this is kind of a very tangible thing that we're doing to kind of, to really kind of move that, this conversation from the kind of big picture to the kind of micro picture.
Right.
So I have a hot take on this.
Shoot.
I think AI is definitely going to disrupt jobs, and people are going to get jobless.
Okay.
Why do I think that? Because earlier the technology we were developing throughout last, since existence, have always had this human aspect in mind. So when we were making swing machines, we had this idea that the guy is going to be pressing a pedal, right? When we were making the first cars, they were like, this is a person going to be braking the car and accelerating the car. Now the paradigm is different. Now we actually want to replace humans. Now we actually want driverless cars. Now we want autonomous vehicles. So basically we want to remove the drivers. And I believe in human creativity and intelligence, and I believe that we are going to get there. And these people will immediately lose their jobs once we get there. Mm-hmm. What needs to be discussed about this is that how do we mitigate for this?
Right.
So for example, right now you don't see these trends because the AI is not there. For example, if I ask AI to generate a letter for me, I still need some time to modify it. Mm-hmm. But eventually when it gets there, I'll probably fire my secretary. Mm-hmm. And say, pay the AI to do it because it never makes mistakes. What we need to discuss about this is how to start upskilling these people already, so that when this time comes, they have a complementary skill to move to. We need to talk about how the money would flow in such an economy,
right,
where you need lesser workers. So like Bill Gates suggested to have an AI tax, for example.
Right. I think that's a really interesting point. So if I combine what you said with what you mentioned, Andrew, is like there's a set of jobs that we have today that are going to get displaced. Might be drivers, might be secretaries, might be knowledge work, all of it, like you were saying, email jobs, if we can call it that. And at the same time, you're getting a large number of new people engaged in the creation of these models who are working in the nitty-gritty in terms of data annotation, red teaming, etc. One of the broader questions, and it's probably the broadest question from a policy-making perspective, is how do these two forces balance between each other? And very much with the view of what can AI actually do for you, right? Because like you said, if AI doesn't make a mistake, then it's a whole different question than occasionally when it does make a mistake, because when your secretary makes a mistake, you know who to point to and ask them to fix it. When OpenAI makes a mistake, you don't know who to point to, despite the fact that the jobs might be placed somewhere else. So maybe I'll start with you this time. Like, how do you think about both of these forces balancing? Where does it sit in balance, right?
So that's a tricky one.
Yeah.
So in AI, so there are multiple components that are at play. So for example, there's the part where we are harnessing the data.
Right.
And then there's the part where we are training the model. Mm-hmm. And then there's a part which is serving this model. So for example, GPT is served as ChatGPT to us.
Right.
So we need to basically somehow balance all three things.
Right.
From the data aspect, we need to see if the data that we're getting is copyright free. If it's copyright, we are acquiring it in the correct way without disrupting the innovation. When it comes to training the models, we have to somehow reduce the bias. So bias is very subjective, by the way. I was working on a judicial application where we had to automate the judicial system using LLMs. And the problem was that I could see that some judgments are biased. But if in my LLM, it outputs that the judgment is biased, then I'm creating a bias. So it's a bit of a tricky field. And finally, then we have the interface to these LLMs where you and me interact with these LLMs. We have to place some guardrails where the right information can be divulged to the audience without actually giving something that can be maliciously used.
Right.
Well, I'm just going to add on to the bias piece, right?
Yeah.
Bias is in the eye of the beholder, right? So the reason that we focus on developing models for this region is to, in some way, control the bias. If you take a model from the US, it's going to have inherent bias from data there. So what we're really actively trying to figure out is how to, A, measure bias,
Yep.
and then B, control bias in models. Because ultimately, if you're going to have a sovereign model or a model for the region, for example, then that bias has, I mean, you want to have bias. You're trying to build in bias for this region and say this is a good place, right? So bias is a strange thing to talk about. Now, how that feeds into this jobs piece, I think is, I think companies and countries are going to develop sovereign models. And we're doing it already. I think Saudi's also doing a sovereign model. It's all Alum is the model that was released here recently. Yep. You know, trying to understand, you know, what that level of bias should be is a big question, and who defines that? Like, what's too much bias? Right. You know, like how do you over bias for something? How do you under bias? And I guess that's where kind of, you know, you have to have local population involved in that, right? Maybe there's a forum for this kind of decision making, but also to contribute to these things. The business model around LLMs, I think, needs to develop where you can contribute to these models instead of them being completely owned by one massive corporation. I think kind of again, the kind of dissolution or having a different business model where you can contribute your data and it can be consumed in this, I think is maybe a future thing that I'd love to see happening. But then that makes AI very inclusive, right? It includes the data that you want to give it, and it gives you control over what you give a model as well. So I'm looking forward to a time where A, we can measure bias and understand what it means and how to kind of control it when we develop these LLMs, and B, you know, define what you want to give. I mean, at the moment in social media, you know, you sign up and you contribute. Your data goes there. You are the product, right? So how do you change this dynamic in the world of LLMs as it disrupts everything? For me, it's an opportunity to change quite a lot of things. But I think unless governments get involved and you know, tech, I guess, becomes more responsible, which is what we're here for today to discuss this. But unless that really changes and the business model changes, I think we're kind of going to replay the social media issues that have popped up in terms of data consumption, privacy, etc. So this, for me, is a really interesting topic, and I don't have all the answers. I can see some of the things that are coming down the pike, and I'd love to discuss them with you offline as well later.
I think before you jump in, Joe, like just to kind of summarize a couple of points that you made, right? There are 2 or 3 implicit assumptions in both of your answers, which are really interesting. One is the fact that biases are a function of the beholder in some sense, right? Like what I might consider a good response is not what you might consider, and that changes as we go elsewhere in the country or in the continent or in the globe. Number 2 is that we're implicitly assuming a world with a large number of different models. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Because a world in which there are 100 or thousands of models that you can play with is implicitly a very different world to where there's only 2 or 3. Like in social media, for example, we went much more centralized, and you had a few large conglomerates, you know, some in China, some in the US, who actually control a large part of the traffic. And the implicit assumption seems to be, in this case, that like there's a lot more models. It has to be local, and you know when it is good enough when it actually touches the population using it. So from the model developer's perspective, sorry.
And I think, Rahat, building on that point, we still see AI is somehow decentralized rather than being centralized. That's why there needs to be more efforts across different entities in the ecosystem. You've mentioned governments and private sector coming together in order to govern better AI. And we're seeing this. Recently, there was, for example, the EU Act that was launched in order to regulate AI. As well, here, Sadaya launched their generative AI policy, which I guess all of us are aware of. But the fact is there are some dimensions that help us govern AI, one of which is actually risk assessment. Though there's not a common risk assessment methodology, but if you wanted to make AI a bit safer, you want to see which use cases or which areas you do not want AI to be used in. For example, emotion monitoring in workplace. That could be a very key area where AI is a no-go because it's a very high risk situation. So having a risk management scenario and having certain human oversight to ensure when things go the wrong way or when there is unwanted biases, they're detected, audited, and acted upon very quickly are two dimensions that are being focused on top of other things that were mentioned, such as fairness, transparency, ensuring privacy as well of the data. And we're seeing these dimensions embedded in all efforts across the government and across the private sector in order to better, I would say, govern AI in a way that will result in economic benefit, ROI, and social impact as well, which is quite positive.
So I like to pitch in a little bit. So what Joe said, 100% agreed. And while governing this thing, I think the most important thing is that the governing body includes the private and the public sector.
Right.
It includes the tech people when we are creating these policies. So I love that EU is, with AI Act, they have this risk levels defined and where they would intervene and where they would not. Moving forward, it would be a great idea if more inclusion is coming from the industry itself.
Yeah.
To get actual know-how of how it works. It's easier to say, do this.
Yeah.
Can it be done?
I think that's an extremely important point. I'll make sort of one final question, then I'd love to hear some of the questions from the audience as well. Because what you just mentioned is a tension between there are things that we think we want it to do, and without necessarily the key understanding, the technical understanding of whether it can be done. So we might say, for example, that I do not want my large language model to output any information that is hateful towards a particular group, which is a totally fair thing to ask for. However, because these are fundamentally not, intelligence, I mean, we call it artificial intelligence, but there is no entity sitting behind it, you can trick them into saying pretty much anything you want. You can trick OpenAI into saying something, and people kind of do these things different ways. So the question is almost like defining a little bit of those guardrails between what can and cannot be done. I'd just love to hear your quick perspectives on that before we kind of go to the audience.
So I think, so the thing is, I think with the current architectures that we have, this is going to be a persistent problem. What I think that defines humans is our ability to be emotional and understand emotions, this human touch. And this is completely missing in AI. These LLMs don't understand the context. They don't understand what they are giving, and they don't understand what the next person is expressing.
Right.
Words are one thing, there is a body language and everything. So I think there will, in some time in future, be a drastic shift in the architecture of this AI, where this knowledge is eventually integrated, and they are more able to, AGI replace humans. Till then, sure.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. You can.
I'm in broad agreements, right? Like for me, context is a big part, but I think context is data, and I also think data is data.
Yeah.
So bottom line, it's all data, right? And if the data contains bad things, then bad things will occur and come out of the model. So for me, it's about how do you treat the data coming into these things rather than kind of going, you throw the internet of data into a model, and then you're surprised when it does something bad, like which I find shocking.
Right.
That people have this expectation, oh, it didn't say what I wanted to say. And I have companies come to me in Abu Dhabi and say, well, why doesn't it say that I'm the best company in the world? And you're like, I'm not sure you understand how this works.
Yeah.
So for me, it's if you want models to behave a certain way, then train them to behave a certain way.
Right.
Treat your data coming in rather than kind of putting all these guardrails in at the other side. So if for me, I'm very technical, as you can tell. But for me, it's all about data, and it's all about curation of data and shaping the data for the response that you want to have. So far, we've gone off as a group of kind of companies and countries and whatnot, and we've just kind of thrown data, put it into a machine, turned it into a model, and gone, there you go. There's no really strong benchmarks, and I'll speak about Arabic because it's it's the region and it's what I do to some degree, and Hindi. Arabic benchmarks, like what is the best? How do you know it's good Arabic? Fusha Arabic or whatever you want to call it, right? Like, what is the best Arabic out there? How do you test? So if you did a test today, what's the best Arabic? For genomics, what's the real test of a genomics model? How do you know if it's good or bad?
Yep.
So for me, I think all these companies have gone off and made all these models phenomenal, myself included, right? But now I'm looking back going, what were we trying to achieve? Like, what's the real eval that you're trying to hit? So for me, it really comes back to the good old data cleansing, data normalization, all the basics, as well as what's the right test? What are you trying to achieve? Like, you put in millions of dollars in, or millions and millions, and maybe even billions of dollars into compute. We've got compute people in the audience, and into all this, but without a real eval at the beginning to define what you want to go to or what's bad, right? So if you say something is bad or something is biased, let's define it, right? So define it up front. So I came from a world of software where it was test-driven development.
Yes.
And I think this is where the AI world needs to go, which is eval-driven development. And I think it's already kind of a thing. Maybe I'm a bit behind the curve already in this, but anyway, that's just my perspective.
It's not there yet, I can tell you that.
Definitely data is the starting point, but I think also there needs to be a definition of roles and responsibilities and accountability across different players. So for example, and this is a real case, one of the customers for a major airline got a wrong reply from a chatbot for an inquiry. This wrong reply, which was not in line with the actual policy, resulted in major financial impact for the customer, and now he's suing the airline. So who's at fault? Is it the vendor? Is it the AI developer? Or is it actually the agency? So when we discuss with our clients, we talk about the TRISM framework, which is basically trust, risk, and security management. It is important to define accountability when it comes to AI. As we see it on a high level, the real clear cut is explainability, transparency, model ups, updates, and adversarial resistance is all with the developer side, with the vendor, who owns the model, right? But when it comes upwards towards privacy, when we discuss data, anomaly detection, application security, all of these are a bit of blurred lines where they are a common responsibility between the actual owner or the vendor of the model and actually the owner of the business or the entity. And this is where we're seeing a lot of focus happening on how can we define clear accountability across these layers in order to be able to manage AI and responsibilities on AI better in the future. You mentioned the word liability at the beginning. It's still not there in AI. There's a lot of efforts being put on regulations, liability, legal requirements of AI, and I'm sure in the future we'll see multiple iterations happening that will help us better manage such situations.
Understood. Before I sort of summarize, questions, please? Yep.
Picking up the point about legal liability for cases such as that airline that led to the customer being heavily out of pocket, how can we find what these legal liabilities should be? And Adil suggested, well, we should ask the industry itself. The people inside the industry will know. But historically, the software industry has always said, we're not taking any responsibility. Before you use our software, you've got to read this long document which says absolutely no responsibility for the software company whatsoever. And it's the same by default with the AI.
Yeah.
So can we put more pressure on? After all, it's a bit like the gun industry. In America, sadly, many people get killed because of misuse of guns, and now, thankfully, some of the parents are even being brought to prison as well. You are responsible. It's a bit like the chemical industry. The chemical industry is a heck of a lot of good, but leaded petrol or fertilizer in the wrong places or CFCs in the wrong place cause turmoil. And governments did act to put that liability. So can't we learn from some of these other industries, not just to trust what the industry says, but to put some external pressure on? As in the words of the former British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, we can't let these companies mark their own homework, can we? They'll just get off with everything.
That is a great, I guess, comment, right? For me, the business model needs to change. It's the alignment it's incorrect, right? So I'm certainly on the business needs to define it. I think software is terrible generally, and they do try and put it on you. So I think the fundamental piece, because they take your data and they sell your data, basically. So they have a double upside, generally of advertising and data, specifically in a lot of different these areas, especially on a B2C basis. So for me, I think the only way it changes is the alignment, right? You have to align the different stakeholders in these things to make sure that it's either you're signing up saying, hey, I understand that this thing may not be perfect, but there's boundaries, right? So you shouldn't have unlimited kind of get out of jail free card, right? That if something does something crazy, but these are non-deterministic systems, right? At the end of the day, they're probabilistic. So for me, I think once you kind of sign up to this is the probability of error, then at least you know what you're dealing with. So I think it's just as long as there's clarity in a situation, you can legislate for it. But when there's a lack of clarity, I mean, I feel like the AI world is really out there. Right? There's so many people talking about it. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to having extreme clarity, scientific clarity. I mean, not business level clarity, but just scientific clarity as to what something is going to do, how it's tested in reality. And then when you understand the testing and how it's been tested, food products, right? They're tested, right? Yep. You have a safety culture around food products. You don't go to every burger ever and test it. You take a sample and you test it. And you make sure that that's good. This is what needs to happen here. And there needs to be safety bodies, both private and public, to test this kind of stuff. At the moment, it doesn't exist. And I certainly would be a big proponent of it, right?
I think there's sort of work going on of governments trying to test the models themselves to see what the outcome actually looks like. And precisely like you said, to draw a boundary between this is something we can ask it to do and we can credibly believe scientifically that the model developers can do it, versus this is a misuse problem where we perhaps may not be able to do. Can I take a couple more questions before sort of...
Just one more thing. Yeah. I mean, you wouldn't go into a doctor and ask them about plumbing, right? Like we have this weird thing that AI could just do anything at any time, even if it's not trained to do it. So this is part of the problem. It's just this lack of understanding and lack of clear communication, but also scientific testing. Sorry, dragging that out.
Yeah. Any other questions? Sorry, over there.
Hi. It's more not like a question, but I'd like to get your opinion about the following. You're saying that some professions will disappear in the future because cars will be replaced with autopilot. But don't you think that more professional will be in the future related to fixing cars, fixing AI, and amount of people who will be working with eventually with some, I don't know, in some specific area will be pretty the same. What's your opinion about it? And another stuff, when we replace some basic work by artificial intelligence, how we will get some professionals who will do complex stuff? It's more about developers as well. We know that some part of the work of juniors will be replaced, and it's already replaced by AI.
Right.
How we will have lead engineers if we do not have juniors? It's so, more general opinion.
The second part of that is a very, very important question that nobody has good answers to. There is a lot of argument about the fact that you can't get senior engineers if junior engineers are not learning by doing some of the grunt work. I think part of the answer, and this might be Pollyanna-ish, is that people will have to learn how to use these new tools to figure it out, because we had some of the same questions come up during the internet and mobile and all of these kind of different eras as well. The former question is really interesting, and I'd love to hear the panel's perspective on it as well, which is if you replace the job of drivers with the job of people sitting at the back office in Waymo and kind of doing either training the models or making sure that things go okay in the car or call centers, they are not one-to-one replaced, right? There's still a net job loss on this side. The reason generally society has worked is because the net job loss here is not made up by the job gain here, but there is the productivity increases and you can create entirely new sectors that did not exist before. Maybe prompt engineers, maybe a whole new thing that we just have never seen before. Now, at every point in history, this has always been speculative until it's proven right looking back. I suspect we are in a similar place, but depending on how quickly this impact hits the economy, we would probably have to do more to actually help some of those people getting displaced in the first place.
And maybe one comment on that. If I ask you 2 years ago, what is a prompt engineer or what is an AI ethics specialist. These jobs didn't exist as we know them now. So I always go back to a simple saying that says the jobs of the future in the coming 5 years are not still created yet. So as we see AI taking some of the routine jobs, the knowledge jobs, we see a lot of opportunities that we're still not fully aware of, to your point, Rohit, and new sectors that will boost additional opportunities for everybody. And here the role is to ensure the upskilling and the reskilling of the workforce to meet these new job opportunities and requirements.
I see the wrap sign, so maybe I'll just quickly sort of summarize a couple of the things that we talked about. I think the fact that we live in a pantheon of models, like there's a large number of them that is going to come up rather than a few to rule them all. Important consideration, I think that's something we talked about. Defining liability to a large extent is about understanding what the models can and cannot do. You can't do one without the other. You don't get to set liability first and then figure out what the model can do. It should go the other way around. It's something that we discussed. The movement of jobs or what people will end up doing is a function to some extent of how good these models can get. But depending on if there's any major trajectory shift, then almost by definition, we would probably need external input, both from the education perspective of like, how do you train people to actually do the senior jobs, assuming the senior jobs exist, of course, but also from the perspective that, if there's a net displacement from one side to the other, the economy gets lopsided, and like every single country, county, state is trying to figure out what this means for their, at the crudest sense, the tax base, but also more broader sense, the human capital that they actually have. I'm going to pause here for now. I mean, this is obviously a very large topic, but thank you very much for coming in and listening. I think this was wonderful. Thank you to the panel. I think you guys were fantastic. I learned a lot, which is great. And thank you for having me. And
Cool.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rohit.
Thank you for moderating. Good man.
Thank you.